Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. And this is my second completely solo episode because Chris and I again have had scheduling conflicts. We are, however, going to record later this week, and so the next episode after this will feature the both of us. Before I forget, make sure to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Make sure to like it, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Comment, join the Discord, So today I am responding actually directly to a comment that one of our listeners made on our Discord in response to our most recent episode. That is the one about how to run a con game. And before that, we talked about how to prepare for a convention game, for running one. And then this last episode, I talked about how to actually run it at the table. Now, there's obviously a lot that goes into running a convention game. And so there were a number of things that I just decided to not comment on. However, one of our listeners said, hey, what about these things? And I thought, I should respond to that. That'd be a good idea, because those were some of the things that I had thought about including, but just for the sake of time and my time, I just decided not to. So today, in a quick follow-up, call it a part 2 of how to run an effective convention game, I'm going to address these 3 things. So thank you for bringing this up. If you haven't listened to that first episode, go back. It's the one that's immediately before this on both YouTube and our Spotify podcast. So today I want to talk about 3 things that go into, or you should consider as a GM as you enter the arena to run that convention game. Now I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. You're running an RPG. Okay, that's where this podcast focuses, so that shouldn't be a surprise. I'm also assuming that you are running a game where we're talking about a 4-hour session. I have never been to a game convention where RPGs were not 4-hour sessions. I've seen 2-hour sessions for board games. I've seen different things, but RPGs, it seems to me the norm is always a 4-hour block. So I'm addressing all of this based on that assumption. But here are the 3 things that Os Jeb mentioned just recently on our Discord. This listener said, hey, what about safety tools? What about character sheet design? And what about time management? So I'm going to hit those in a different order. I'm going to talk about character sheet design first. Now, if you didn't listen to the first episode, I did talk about, and the one about planning for running con games, what I believe to be the incredibly high importance of choosing an easy system, or a system that you can streamline. That is, you can strip away additional mechanics, non-essential mechanics and subsystems to make the core mechanic, the core system, understandable quickly for someone who's never played it before. So with that in mind, character sheet design. I use the simplest character sheet that I can find for whatever system I'm running. I mean, you know how it is. Online, you can find umpteen bajillion different versions of a 5e character sheet. Mongoose Traveler, there's tons of different character sheets. You find character sheets that are landscape, that are portrait. You find, 1 page, 2 page, What I do is, for published games, I find the simplest, in my opinion, obviously, character sheet that I can find online, a 1 page and that's what I go with. I don't create new character sheets. I just find one that puts, most games I run are attribute and skill-based games, maybe with some like talents or feats or things like that. So you need your core attributes or characteristics, whatever they're called. They need to be prominently featured, big font. You need to have whatever passes for skills or things like that prominently featured. You need to have, if there are things like talents, like special abilities, those need to be prominently featured. And if equipment, like details for equipment, if that's important, that needs to be prominently featured. That's it. I mentioned in the last episode that I knew something was going, I was confident, sadly, that something was going to go sideways with the Shadowrun game that I joined because it was a highly detailed 2-page character sheet. So you're flipping back and forth. I want to find a character sheet that can just lay flat, never be turned unless the player wants to take notes and they didn't bring paper of their own. But like I said, I go for character sheets that prominently, easily feature the most important information. What do I mean by most important information? The most important mechanical information from that character that I am going to focus on when I go through and explain the rules, as I mentioned in the last episode, when I take people on a tour of their character sheet. Now, I have at times written up additional equipment and things like that on cards, using the larger, they're like 3x3 or 4x4 sticky notes. I'll sometimes write out simple equipment stats on those so that if there's like a haul, if they find a bunch of stuff, I can just hand those cards out. And then you don't have to say, okay, you have a pistol and its range is, but they're writing it down and wasting time, and that's stupid. So I will often have those kinds of things, or if there are items that could be found, I'll write them up on little cards that I can just hand out. But otherwise, I just look around online and find an easy character sheet. I think you could flip a coin. I think it's personal preference, landscape versus portrait. For me, it's again, when I look at it, and I've got decent eyes at my age. I have to wear reading glasses, but if I hold it here, like upwards of arm's length, then I can quickly be like characteristics, skills, talents, equipment, boom, I'm good to go. Then I'm happy. That's the character sheet I will go with. When you take the players on a tour of the character sheet and you introduce them to the core mechanic, which they are going to be using almost exclusively over every other rule system or your subsystem in the game, you've got to be able to say, okay, look in the upper left-hand corner. You see your characteristics? Those are your stats. And I always tell them, like, this is the maximum, this is the minimum, this is average. So they can look at their numbers and have a clue as to, like, okay, where does my character stand? Oh, my character's pretty strong. My character's not particularly fast. Okay, great. And then, okay, now move to the right. You see where skills are. That's how I move around. I give them the relative directions on their character sheet. And again, if it's organized in such a way and the font is large enough and there's enough breathing room, and that's a tough thing. And this goes back to the whole issue of choosing a system that is appropriate for use at a con. A really complicated system or a really detailed system that uses lots of variables and like every weapon has like 7 or 8 different variables attached to it is going to require a more densely populated character sheet, which is going to then necessitate either 2 sides, which is a pain in the butt to flip back and forth, or small font, or very little padding within cells and very little margin between them. And, if your game needs that much detail, maybe you want to choose a different rule set, to run at a con. So, okay, that aside, next thing, time management. Oh boy, howdy, time management's hard. Time management is hard at your home game, and it presents special challenges at a convention. When you have your 4-hour block, a group of players, some of whom you don't know, have trusted you with 4 hours of their life that they will never get back, and you're supposed to provide them with fun. There's actually, being a GM at a convention really does present a greater burden on you as a person than it does at home, because you're playing with your friends. They understand you. They're going to be far more forgiving. Like my Traveler home game, we ended about a half an hour, 45 minutes earlier than we normally do this last session because the players made a series of decisions and worked through things, and they got to the bleeding edge of where I was prepared. And the next scene, it was way more like RP heavy. And I just said, look, I'm not ready. I want to run this well so that we all have a good time with it. And I'm not ready to move to this. So sorry, but and they're like, yeah, no big deal at all. If you were to stop at like the 3-hour mark or the 2:45 mark and be like, yeah, I'm not prepared. Like, that's just not acceptable. There is that burden that's on you as a convention GM, but time management is really an issue. So here's how I approach it. I approach a lot of things like this when I'm trying to plan something. I plan backwards. Okay, where do I want to end by 3:45? Not 4 hours, And what stinks about, I mean, this is always aspirational. It happens less than I would like it to. That is, I would like it to happen 100% of the time. But reality gets a vote. Here's what I want to do. I want to be reaching the final moments of the resolution. I want to be resolving the story at 3:45 because I know it's going to run over. Okay. So I'm going to plan backwards from the 3 hour and 45 minute mark. And I'm going to look at the final scene, which in a con game is, let's be honest here, almost always going to be like high action, explosions and monsters or tentacles or space battles or stuff like that. I'm going to look at that scene and think, all right, based on my experience as a GM, based on the type of game this is, the characters there, all those kinds of things. And this is where I can't say X, do X. This is based on your experience as a GM. You have to look at this and think about how long do you think that final scene or encounter, whatever you want to call it, is going to take. How long is it going to take in real time? Let's say 45 minutes. Just for kicks, because I mean, anything that's combat related, it's going to slow things down, and players are going to, you know how it works. Players are going to get involved in all kinds of, analysis and maybe analysis paralysis. And if you have a map and you're moving things around, or if you're doing theater of the mind, there is going to your 3 minutes of in-game time is going to take you 45 or 50 minutes. So let's say that final encounter is going to take you 45 minutes. That means you need to be into it by the 3 hour mark. And then you work backwards from there. Now, not every scene deserves the same amount of real time. Some scenes are more narrative in nature. For example, in the, and I'll use this as my example, my 1998 haunted house in Denver story that I ran at the convention had a combination of role-playing, action, and narrative scenes. And what I mean by those is a narrative scene is the characters are not, the players are not playing their characters. There isn't any role play. The players are describing what their characters are doing, third person omniscient. They are not inhabiting their character. They are just saying, I'm going to go to the library, or I'm going to go to City Hall, and I'm going to look up blizza, blazza, blizza, blue. And we make some rolls, and we go from there. So it is, that's closest to a board game. You're moving your piece around and you're hoping to accomplish things. So there's your narrative scene. The role play scenes in that adventure, sometimes I use those to end a narrative scene or to start a narrative scene. Like, you meet with your friend from the Chamber of Commerce, your like real estate sales mentor at the Chamber of Commerce. How are you going to present? You want to find out X, Y, and Z. How are you going to present that to him so it doesn't sound weird? And so I ask the player to role play a little bit of that, and then I take the role of the other dude, and then we connect a narrative scene. We just go into narrative mode after that. Okay. And then you've got your action scenes where you're in initiative and there's rolling and space and who goes in what order. That becomes very important. Those tend to be the scenes that can take the longest. Although narrative scenes, sometimes, when players get into analysis paralysis or run after red herrings you didn't throw at them, those can take a while. My point is, you are working backwards from that final, most exciting scenes, and you are looking at the likely scenes, action, RP, narrative, in your adventure, and you're just trying to eyeball for yourself, how long do I think this is going to take? Or maybe more importantly, how much am I willing to give to this scene, and how much do I don't want this to be RP, I want this to be narrative. I'm going to present it that way, and I'm not going to necessarily tell the players, this is how we're doing this scene, but I'm going to treat it that way so as to encourage the players to treat it that way too. And so we can, we didn't hand wave 8 hours worth of investigation done by 6 different characters in pairs in 3 different places. You don't hand wave that so much as you quickly narrate through it, and there you go. So you have your hand on the brake. You've got your foot on the brake and your foot on the accelerator. And you're deciding which scenes are going to take less time in real time and more, or versus more time. And again, you work backwards through your adventure. Now, I know I'm talking about scenes, and that's more of a like cinematic sort of role-playing approach. It's codified in the 2D20 games and other games as well. It's not something that you find in more like any version of D&D doesn't use scenes. Pathfinder doesn't use scenes. A lot of games don't. But I think it's useful to conceptualize your story, that is, chunk your story into pieces that you see as scenes. And the easiest way to conceptualize that is to think of different locations. Well, when my characters are here, this is a scene. When they're somewhere else, that's a different scene. And then I think you can put yourself in a position where you say, okay, what is that a scene that's really worth conversation, role play? Do I need to roll initiative? No, I don't. I don't need to do that. Oh, it's a narrative scene. We're just going to hand wave. We're going to move through it narratively. People are going to roll some dice, and we're going to be able to cover a lot of in-game time very quickly using very little real-world time. Anyway, so you're moving backwards from your final big scene and deciding, and in my very left-handed mind, I'm seeing these segments along a line, and the segments are dynamically shrinking or growing, representing more time or less real time at the table. So that's how I go through it, moving backward. Now, here's the trouble. It's a 4-hour session. Realistically, you should plan for no more than 3 hours and 45 minutes because it's going to take extra time, but your session's not going to start on time. It's not, I mean, even if everyone is sitting at your table at the start time, you're going to have to go choose characters and go over rules and go things like that. Any other like table preferences or whatever you have, housekeeping, you're going to have to go over those things. So another thing also that I do is in con games, and I will announce this from the jump as I'm such and such, welcome, thanks so much. This is a, such and such type of game. It uses this system. Thanks for joining me. Want to let you know, we are going to take a 10-minute break as close to the midpoint of the session as possible. So as you're planning backwards, you need to subtract 10 minutes. If you tell people on the front end, hey, me personally, I hate cell phones at the table. I hate cell phones, I hate I hate electronics at the friggin' table. Give me paper, damn it, for so many reasons. I ask people to do that, and I say, listen, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So you got to go to the bathroom, you want to get more food, you got to go take a call. Let's all do that then so we can all focus on the story. And I'd say, every time people are at the con because they want to get away from the daily crap. And so they're happy to do that, but that subtracts from your time. So if you had 3:45, you're now at 3:35. Let's be safe and round that down to 3.5. So you have 3.5 hours now. And you're probably going to subtract about 15 minutes from that to get people their characters and to quickly go over the rules. So realistically, you have about 3 hours and 15 minutes or so of playtime. So that's how I manage time. It's not easy. Pacing is one of the things. It's actually one of the things that I'm really hard on myself about because you want there to be tension, but you don't want the players to feel like you're just pushing them and they don't have any time to breathe. But if you give them too much time to breathe, the tension, whatever there is, and the drama it's like a balloon deflating. So it's a really hard balance to keep. Like I said, backwards planning and chop your session into scenes, whatever you want to call them, and then assign, is this action? Is this narrative? Is this RP? Or is there some overlap? And how much time do I think we should devote to that in real time? So there's the second thing. Now, the third thing I was asked to address is safety tools. And I've mentioned this stuff, and probably long-time listeners, this is not going to be a surprise. But I'll address it from this angle initially. The game convention that I attend every year, when you as a GM fill out your session request, you say, hey, I'd like to run a session of this, blah, 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 here are all the details and stuff like that. Very, very clever on the part of the convention organizers is they have you assign it a rating like a movie. Is it G? Is it PG? Is it PG? All the way up. Is it adults only? And then they also ask, are there any serious or potentially I don't know what word they use, but I'll just say challenging or troubling themes or things that you think are important to mention. And you fill that out. And so when you are scrolling through the website and you're looking at all these different games, you have an opportunity to see, oh, yeah, this is a rated R game, and there's going to be cosmic and body horror. If you register for the game, which is encouraged through the app, you already read the description. It's there. So when it comes to safe, oh, and the other thing also at this convention on all the RPG game tables, there is a laminated sheet. It's this very dense, like size 10 font or smaller, 3 column, very dense form, and it has a dry erase or whatever marker like dummy corded to it. And they're supposed to pass it around. That's what they suggest. Oh, and there's also a laminated card with a big X on it that's sitting in the middle of the table, and they encourage you to pass it around and have everyone check off everything that troubles them. I don't do that. In fact, I refuse to do that. And before you go, oh my gosh, what a jackass, hear me out. This convention already asks all GMs to describe their games, to rate their games, and if their games are like outside of a certain, like if you're above PG-13, they ask for more qualifiers. So anybody who shows up has already had the opportunity to know what this story is about. Now, if you, the GM, go outside of that, above it, let's just say, that's not cool because that's false advertising. Now, if a player shows up and decides to like get weird at your table, you as a GM are entirely, you tell them to leave. Say, hey, listen, remember, this is a PG-13 game, which incidentally is virtually all the games I run. I always do them PG-13 because I don't mind if teenagers come around. I don't really want little kids just because of the maturity level. But, if someone all of a sudden decides to like go weird on me and get like rated X or something like that, or NC-17, I'll just say, hey, remember, this is a PG-13 game. You just say it with a smile, and then you guide around it by describing the activity in a new direction. I think I've had that happen once or twice, and that solved it right away. No problem at all. If you don't engage, people tend to not, they get the clue. But other than that, I mean, as a GM, I don't think when there already is this system in place, I don't think you need to. Now, if my con did not have that, I would make sure to describe, and I would give it a rating in the description. And so here's where, here's where personal preference that might annoy people. I am not a fan of this vibe, this thing that seems to be so prevalent in our society now, where it feels like everything is run by the HR department. Human relations do not need to be governed by protocols and systems and checklists and, frankly, like inhuman bullshit like that. I just won't do that. I refuse to approach my hobby as if I should obey, like show up genuflecting to the freaking the petty tyrants in the HR department. They want to suck all the humanity out of human interrelations by making everything beholden to a system or a protocol or a checklist, like I said. I refuse to, it's not the lowest common denominator, it's the most declared, the person who declares themselves to be most sensitive in the moment then becomes the tyrant at the table. Look, if something, you as a GM, I think that, you need to be clear on like, all right, what's this session going to be about? You need to broadcast that. And then you need to stick to it. You need to stick within the lines, the lines you draw for yourself. And you also need to recognize that there may well be people at the table whose limits are different than yours. And so that there could be some friction at the frontiers between you and them. I've been running games and playing games at this convention now for, oh my golly, like 15 years, something like that. And I just don't think, I think that there is this, again, it's the HR mentality. Like, we need to be worried that something could go wrong for like 0.5% of the people who are like hypersensitive and looking for something to flip out about. So let's ask everyone to preemptively, before we even have any evidence that this is going to happen, let's bend everything preemptively around our notion of the best way to handle human interrelations. And so they produce these checklists. Like I said, that is the HR mentality. It totally is. And I think that people get along best when they get along naturally. and they recognize that their opinion's not the only one in the room, and so there might be some friction, and you just look each other in the eye and you smile and you give grace, and you and you move on. You focus on the game and not this other crap. I think the best way to approach that issue is not with stilted protocols, laminated cards, asking people or directing people like in the new Dungeon Master's Guide to put their hands in the air like an X. Like, what? I mean, that's just weird. Like why don't we make an awkward moment even more awkward by asking people to behave in this weird and stilted and unnatural manner as directed by Gaming HR? F that. I won't do it. I think if you are kind and you recognize that there may be people who don't see things the same level as you do or in the same ways, you handle it on a case-by-case basis. Of course, the easiest way to preempt this problem is to run a game that like doesn't involve like, oh yeah, I really want to run a con game with a bunch of strangers that involves like infant sacrifice and torture. Like y'all ought to look at yourself in the mirror and ask, like, what the heck kind of game? What's with that? But I say keep the game at PG-13 and be clear about where any of the rough edges might be, like rough edges to a reasonable person, because there's always going to be some weirdo, frankly, out there who is going to get all chapped over like, oh, you killed a butterfly. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not going to twist myself around your moment to moment narcissistic quote unquote fears or traumas. I'm just not going to do it. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who like, they may show up and be something does hit them in the wrong way. And you just got to be kind in the moment. But back to this whole issue of safety tools, like I said, I don't think the issue is surrendering the culture at your table and the culture of gaming to these petty HR department tyrants who want to quietly tell you how to do everything. Don't do it. Hold your toy AK-47 in the air and yell Wolverines. Do that instead. So anyway, thank you for listening. Go ahead, like I said, hey, subscribe, like, join the conversation in the Discord. Tell me what you think. I'm genuinely curious. I'd like to have a conversation about this, regardless of platform that you are using. And again, thanks so much for listening. Have a great day. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.